What's going on? It is Scott Churchson from Streampunk Entertainment and Streampunk Soccer. Alongside me, as is often the case, is Mr. Halen Haru from Five Borough Footy. And joining us today is Columbus Crew radio play-by-play announcer, Mr. Christopher Doran. Sir, how the heck are you today?
I'm great. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
My
Yes,
pleasure.
sir.
Talk a little bit about the team in this case here. It was a little bit of a change in the offseason. Cucho's gone. You've had Gazdag come in. We'll talk about that in a second. But you have probably one of the smartest coaches in all of Major League Soccer, if not soccer across the world, in Wilfried Nancy. Talk a little bit from your perspective about the offseason, the adjustments, and how you felt about it.
Well, we were very fortunate in 2023 when Wilfried Nancy came in and took a team that had struggled, but still had talent, and was able to finesse it very quickly into the way he wanted them to play. And we had seen parts of that when he spent 2 years as head coach in Montreal. He was an assistant with Thierry Henry, a fellow Frenchman. And Henry, after the pandemic, said, you know what, Montreal is going to spend a majority of the season down in Florida as their home base, and I'd rather be with my family back in Europe. So he left. A perfectly reasonable explanation, if you ask me. Nancy had been with the Montreal system for 11, maybe 12 years, and he took over as head coach rather seamlessly and was able to get that team to produce on the attacking side of the ball, and then in the second year produce defensively as well, to the point where he was attracting a lot of attention. When Tim Bezbatchenko, the general manager and president of the Crew, brought him in, he committed to that same game model for the Columbus Crew. And within a year, had us standing on the pedestal in 2023 as MLS Cup champs. So it was exciting because we were able to see a lot of attacking soccer in that first year. We were able to see a lot of possession. Fans follow the ball. Fans do not follow the space. They don't follow the runs off the ball unless it's in an immediate area. But you could see in the game model that Wilfried Nancy had employed, it was everybody participating, either defensively with the high press and the immediate press, if you will, or in possession, in the buildup and the attack. We've seen an evolution of that in 2024. Columbus was able to take on 3 Mexican sides, 2 of which they were successful in the CONCACAF Champions Cup down in Mexico, and get to the final, unfortunately falling short in that one-game final against Pachuca. Put the footnote in there about food poisoning. And then Leagues Cup during the summer, another successful run. So I'll take your question, and we'll go back, Scott, to last summer. There was a lot of interest in Cucho Hernandez. He was our leading scorer. He was on the pace to break scoring records in the club history in a very short period of time. And people were paying attention to what Wilfried Nancy was able to get out of this group. As the phone calls started to come in, Wilfried Nancy, Issa Tall, the general manager then at the time, and now as well, but he had taken over for Bezbatchenko, who went to Europe, were able to convince Cucho that maybe he should stay until the winter transfer window. And he did. And so we battled to the end of the season. We were just a couple of games out of the Supporters Shield title, and unfortunately lost 3-2 to Miami in Columbus last fall. We fall short in the playoffs. I think anyone who watches an American league of any sort understands that the playoffs are very different than the regular season. Whether it's a best-of-3 series, a best-of-5 series, or a one-off, it's always going to be different. So obviously some disappointment getting knocked out in the first round, but, coming into the offseason in 2024, 2025, there was some thinking that we may lose a player or two. Real Betis and a couple of other teams were on the phone talking about Cucho Hernandez. The numbers weren't right. And so Cucho Hernandez went through preseason training with the Columbus Crew. Now, simultaneously, Christian Ramirez, who was a bit player, but a big player in the success that we'd had over the last 2 years, was also concerned about his role in the team wanted to perhaps return to Los Angeles, where he's from,
Mhm.
and was I think talking money. He was still on contract with us, but it got to a point where Ramirez had struck a deal with Los Angeles. That deal got tied up at the league office. I'm not sure how close. I know you guys both are close to the league, but I don't know about the league office. Every deal has to go through the league office in New
Mhm.
York. And then the press release to announce the deal has to be approved through the league office in New York. So there are stages where everything from the club has to bounce back to New York and then bounce back to the club in Major League Soccer. That announcement for Ramirez got tied up.
Hmm.
So we were seeing rumors that Ramirez had already moved his family back to Los Angeles. And in the meantime, there's word about Hernandez quite possibly being lured by La Liga to come over and play in Spain. And sure enough, in like the second or third to last day of the trade window in January, Real Betis made an offer. The general manager, the head coach, and Cucho Hernandez all talked to one another about it, and they decided it was time for him to go.
Mhm.
That the money was okay. It wasn't exactly right, but the money was okay. And the club understood why Cucho needed to expand his career. There were some undercurrents of messaging from the Colombian national team that Cucho might not get the opportunity he was looking for in the World Cup if he wasn't playing outside of the United
Hmm.
States.
Oh, wow.
And so Cucho had to make that decision, and he did. This did not catch the club by surprise, but to be honest with you, that late in the trade window, there was really no way the club could say no to Cucho to go.
Mhm.
And Betis was offering a fee that was acceptable, again, not optimal. And that's how the whole thing went down. You know, the general public isn't privy to a lot of the details behind the scenes. And there may be some things that I've left out on purpose because I can't talk about it. But the honest to goodness answer is the timing was in Real Betis's favor. And as an MLS club, you do not want to be known as a team that holds players back.
Sure.
Right. Yeah.
So that's how the long of it is. That's how Cucho ended up leaving, and Ramirez ended up getting that final press release from New York announcing that he had joined Los Angeles.
Taylor?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to speak a little bit. I mean, that, you talking about Cucho made me consider something I've always thought about when it came to Columbus. And you mentioned how well he got them to perform in Leagues Cup and other tournaments and such.
Yeah.
In the MLS, when it comes to like identifying the teams that are you would consider to be elite, it's those teams that can survive things like that, right? The loss of major
Mhm.
players like Cucho Hernandez and Nathan Morris, how they perform in not just the league but in tournaments, running concurrently with that, um, and stuff like that. And I just wondered, like, what is it specifically about Nancy that gets this
Hmm.
Columbus team to perform well despite that? Because you can take any other, you can throw a rock and hit an MLS club that you pluck one player out of that and it looks nothing like itself. So what is it
Uh,
about Wilfried and what he's brought to this team that makes them remain Columbus? Does
Hmm.
my question?
yeah, it's a great question, Halen, and you're right. We really did not miss much of a beat once Cucho and Christian were gone. We stayed undefeated until this past weekend. We weren't scoring at the clip that we wanted to score at, and certainly probably would have scored more had Cucho and or
Mhm.
Christian been a part of the piece in the first 8 games of the regular season. But Wilfried Nancy has a number of principles in his game model that are important for the players to buy into. It is a very ego-less approach to the
Hmm.
game. It is a we, not me, and that's his phrase, not mine, but we, not
Mm,
me approach. We don't run with our teammates, we run for them. That's
Hmm.
another phrase. Um, and so these are uh, principles that the players have been introduced to over the last 2.5 years that they've bought into. So you can bet that if he is talking to a player to bring him in, And that player is saying, look, it's all about me winning the Golden Boot. It's about me getting called up to the national team. It's about me getting called to Europe.
Me.
Right. If if that player is having that conversation, he is not signing on the dotted line in Columbus.
Mm, mhm,
Um, and so I think what's amazing about what Wilfried was able to do was he was able to come into Columbus with a roster established. Remember, Cucho was already on the roster. And he was able to kind of flip Cucho into understanding that he's not going to be a front running number 9, stretching the field and taking the ball over his shoulder. He's actually going to be checking into the midfield and helping. And when we lose possession and he's closest to the ball, he's the first defender. And so he's got to turn and put the press on and initiate the press to win the ball back. So those principles were absorbed by Cucho over time. I don't know how easy it was. I do know that we had one team policy suspension for Cucho. I saw the behavior on the field in Charlotte a couple of years ago. I can't say that that was exactly the reason why, but his behavior resulted in him not dressing for a couple of games, including a key game in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. And yet Columbus was able to survive. I remember back in 2023, we showed up for a game and Darlington Nagbe wasn't starting, but he was on the bench.
mm.
You know how many games Darlington Nagbe has started on the bench in a full uniform? 15 out of like 440 games. When Darlington Nagbe's available, coaches play him. That's how good he is. He's only missed 15 games on a start dressed on the bench. Why is Darlington Nagbe sitting on the bench? We asked him post-game, and Wilfried Nancy says you'll have to ask Darlington. Well, you could deduce from that Darlington maybe didn't hit all of the bullet points on the team rules and had to sit. We never asked Darlington. We prefer just to use our imagination as to why. But the point is that he had to come in dealing with some big time players, and he was able to get them to run with each other, or run for each other, I should say, and to embrace that we, not me approach to every game. And as a result, what we have is we have 11 players plus the reserves all battling on the same page. And that's what makes the group so cohesive.
Nice.
Another, you mentioned Darlington Nagbe, who for me is the MLS GOAT.
Yeah.
And he was part of one of the best MLS partnerships that I've ever seen as well, right? Aiden Morris, who has been transferred, what is it, to Middlesbrough, right?
That is correct.
Yeah. So speak a little bit about that partnership and how has it gone, and since Aiden's departure, how has it gone as far as like trying to replace what he brought to the position? And yeah, just talk a little bit about that.
Well, Halen, I'm sure what you remember about Aiden Morris is that he was a bit of a bulldog in the midfield. Kind of reminded me a little bit of a Dax McCarty, who played for the Red Bulls and 5 other MLS teams in his 18-year career. Aiden took no SH double toothpicks from anybody.
Okay.
He just didn't, and he let you know. He had that attitude, the bad boy attitude in the midfield, and as you said, he's playing against the nicest guy in the entire league in Darlington Nagbe, and most effective too in terms of midfielders. So you put that tandem together, and you've got Aiden going in and doing the dirty work, and Darlington coming out making it look clean. And it was an incredible combination. The symmetry between the two of them, as asymmetric they looked in terms of personality and the way they approached the game, they were symmetrical in the way that they brought cohesion to that midfield. And so it was a real delight. And of course, Aiden got a lot of attention because he came up through the academy, came right to the first team, and was so young when he started. He was the youngest player to ever start in a Major League Soccer MLS Cup. And he started in place of Darlington Nagbe, who in 2020, on the morning of the MLS Cup against Seattle, had tested positive for COVID. And so Darlington couldn't be anywhere near the facility on that
Wow.
day. So Darlington and his family had to watch from home. And
Mhm.
if you remember back then, there was this so-called uh, uh, not incubation. What's it called when they put you, when you're supposed to stay
Oh,
away
It was
from?
a
quarantine?
quarantine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
quarantine. There was this ridiculous quarantine rule that beyond the federal government and state governments, even the local organizations were adhering to, companies and that sort of thing. And obviously, we could do a different type of show on that. But the point is that Darlington had to sit in his basement with his family
Mhm.
and watch the MLS Cup. Well, Aiden Morris started, and he had a career night that night.
Mhm.
So that's where all the love came from for Aiden. He's a great kid. He was my wife's favorite player, and to see him have the chance to go off to Europe like every young kid, I think sort of dreams was really big for Columbus. The switch in for Aiden was Sean Zawatsky, who
Mhm.
is also
Hmm.
an Academy product and an Ohio kid. And while he's not quite as flashy when he does the dirty work,
Hmm.
he is one of the smartest players I think I've ever seen. And Zawatsky has continued to prove that game in and game out. Over the course of his 3-year career with the first team, Zawatsky has played every position from midfield to center back to goalkeeper. We had an unfortunate game last year against Seattle, where our goalkeeper was red carded in the first
Mhm.
15 or 20 minutes. And
Okay.
Zawatsky was the one who and we didn't have a reserve on the bench, which is really weird. So Zawatsky put on the goalkeeper uniform and finished the game out as goalkeeper. Didn't win that game, but he got a lot of accolades for the guts that he showed in filling in that spot. So the Zawatsky-Nagbe pairing was something that we got accustomed to. And then Dylan Chambeau came in from France last summer. Chambeau is very, very articulate on the ball, does a great job of dribbling into space, getting out of traffic, and distribution is strong from him. In the same period of time, we lost our center back, Rudy Camacho, to injury, who came down from Montreal in 2023 and was one of Wilfried's guys in Montreal for a couple of years. Camacho can't start the preseason. Zawatsky moves back to the center back role. And now we have Zawatsky and his brain power back there directing the defense on the back line. It's really been quite good. It really has. And as I said, it got us through 8 games undefeated, and we lost to Miami on the weekend 1-0.
Speaking of Miami, you spent a trip in Cleveland over the weekend on this. Talk a little bit about the home match that you guys actually had.
Yeah.
In Cleveland in this case here. I know the fans weren't too happy about it, but what was your take if you had one or anything of that sort?
Just on the going to Cleveland.
Yeah,
Yeah. I haven't spoken publicly about this, but I'm happy to do that.
it's up to
And
you. I'll
yeah.
leave it to you. Whatever you want to do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I'll acknowledge that my company gets paid by the club. Okay, so you can take that however you want. The meaning behind that is just so you know where the money flows. Okay,
Hmm.
but I'm going to tell you this: if you've ever read The Beckham Experiment by Grant Wall, and you should, you'll understand that the pockets were emptied to get David Beckham to MLS because it
Hmm.
would be a high-profile switch. Among the pockets that were emptied were Adidas's pockets. Adidas put, I don't know, 10, 15, $20 million from their brand into David Beckham's back pocket to help him feel coerced enough to move to Los Angeles and play for the Galaxy. Now, that 15 or $20 million that Adidas had was going to Beckham instead of going to the MLS owners and the clubs.
Hmm.
All right. So the owners were giving up money to get Beckham over here, but they all were made to understand that Beckham was going to raise the profile of the league.
It did.
And it did. Yeah. We sold tickets out the wazoo. The same thing happened with Messi, only this time it wasn't Adidas, although Adidas did participate, but I think it's in a different way. This time we had Apple Television empty their pockets and put it in the hip pocket of Lionel Messi. That money that Apple had was supposed to go to the owners and the clubs in Major League Soccer. If Apple unloads $25 million, they're not going to the safe in petty cash, okay? They're taking it off the top. Because when Messi comes to MLS, Apple and MLS have already got a relationship.
Hmm.
So that's one relationship Messi doesn't have to negotiate. So MLS says, let's go ahead and take that 25 million and put it in Messi's pocket. Well, that's 25 million not going to the owners to help them develop their academies or help them pay players or help them even
Hmm.
think about the possibility of adding another DP or altering signing mechanisms to get higher paid players on the roster. So they have to be able to make the money up somehow. And so what a lot of these owners have done who are not allowed or who are not playing home games in small soccer stadiums, and by the way, 20,000 is not small,
Hmm.
is they go down the street or they go down the highway to a football stadium and they fill it with 65,000. Now nobody bats an eye when Soldier Field sells out 65,000
Hmm.
seats. No one bats an eye when Foxborough gets filled at Gillette Stadium with 65,000. We don't have 65,000 down here.
Hmm.
Yet our owners are among the 30 ownership groups that are not going to take money from Apple because Messi showed up. Well, they should be given some level of, I wouldn't say permission, but flexibility in being able to make up some of that money. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's what our ownership did. They went up the highway to the stadium that they leased for the Cleveland Browns and they said, let's fill the stadium. And that's what they did. 60,000 plus.
Hmm.
It was the fourth largest audience to witness a Columbus Crew game in the 30-year history of the league.
Hmm.
The other higher attended games were in Atlanta. And, you know, that's Mercedes-Benz Stadium.
Sure.
Atlanta's going to bring in their 65,000. They almost do that regularly with 35,000 for home games. So, you know, that's my reaction to it. It's a very simple business equation. You're absolutely right. There were some supporters who were not happy about it. I completely understand that. You know, I'm not happy when I have to pay $9 for organic eggs at Kroger, but that's what happens sometimes, you know, and I can opt not to buy the eggs. I can opt to complain about it, but I'm too old to get on social media and, you know, communicate what bothers me day in and day out. I wouldn't be able to live my life.
Chris,
I hope that doesn't bore you, but that's really the
Not in the
background on it.
slightest.
no,
No, dude.
not at all, dude. Chris, speaking of eggs, you know, like when clubs change hands from manager to manager,
Yeah.
usually the new manager has to, so to speak, inherit the previous administration's economy, like what culture he laid down, the roster that he picked, and all that stuff. Um, Not to put you on the spot, but could you speak a little bit about your things that you've noticed that are the similarities or differences between Berhalter and Wilfried Nancy?
Hmm.
Good question, Halen, because you cover a really important part of the club's history, and that is the Save the Crew movement.
Hmm.
When Berhalter was head of the club, I can't, you know, I wish the best for Greg Berhalter for a lot of reasons. Number one, he's a terrific guy. Number two, he contributed a lot to Major League Soccer and to U.S. soccer as a player. Number three, he deserves the opportunity like anybody else would. But when Greg was head coach of the Columbus Crew, he was wonderful to me, seemingly wonderful to the players. He was a true players coach, comes from the Bruce Arena tree of coaching, if that means anything to you. And I think had a softer side than Bruce Arena, certainly a couple of generations removed from the Arena generation, but is just a really lovely guy with the players. He was put in a tough spot in 2017 when it was made known that the club was going to move. 2018 was going to be the closing curtain on the first club to sign on to Major League Soccer here in Columbus. And so he wasn't given the flexibility with the roster. He had gone to MLS Cup in 2015, unfortunately lost, but it was a really tough time. And then in 2018, when the club was saved, Greg had already had plans to move on and become head coach of the men's national team. And the pieces had to be picked up. I mean, the academy was essentially in shambles, which is amazing to me because we've since then been able to get so many good players out of that group. So the academy was in shambles. The home field, historic Crew Stadium at the time, had not been cared for. We would do night games, and part of the festivities when the lights came on was to count how many bulbs had not been replaced. The field at the time was natural grass, and our grounds crew has always been very committed. So the best part about the facility in the late days were the 10 guys who really care about how good that lawn looked. And thanks to Scott's for all of their help. But beyond that, you could see a club that was ready to pack the moving van. And so Greg was in a really tight spot, and we had a lot of people who had already committed to going south, either on the headline page or behind a closed door. They had already made commitments to go, so we were going to be losing a lot of the front office too. And then when the Crew was saved, and the ownership group stepped up, the Haslams, the Edwards family, and the Johnsons family, it was time to put things back together. And they did it with their hair on fire, because you only had 4 months to turn around and have a club and be ready to go. And so Caleb Porter, Tim Bezpachenko was the first hire by the ownership group. He came back to Ohio. He's an Ohio guy. And then the ownership group brought in Caleb Porter, who's now the head coach at the Revolution. And Caleb, in a year's time, was able to guide Columbus to the MLS Cup in 2020 in a pandemic. So it was a really extraordinary time. What's left from that, I would say not much, Halen, to get to your question. We had 3 years with Caleb Porter. They were good years. I beg your pardon, 4 years of the 5 that he signed on for. They were good years, a little disappointing in 2022 when Cucho came over. We had Lucas Rayon, and things weren't really going that great. So we knew in the end he was probably going to go, and that's when Wilfried Nancy was hired in December of 2022.
And the rest is history that way.
Yeah.
So, that the all-time debate, whether or not promotion or relegation would
This will be
work
the last
here.
thing, by the way. We'll let you go after this one.
That's okay.
Yeah, sorry to keep you so long, but
You're
this
not.
is my last question for you.
Okay.
So promotion and relegation, can it work here? What are your feelings about it?
Well, what are your feelings about it, Halen?
I mean, not to get too far into the weeds, but it's necessary, and it makes games interesting. And obviously you shouldn't just do things just because other people are doing them. But if that's the way 99% of the rest of the world does football, then that's how, I mean, if we intend on doing the sport in the truest sense of it, then that's how we should do it.
Okay. Do you mind if I ask a couple questions?
Yeah, sure. Oh,
okay. All right, good.
The turntables have turned.
So what qualifies as making the games interesting?
Late season games still have something to fight for.
Stakes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you take a team, I don't want to throw. I mean, San Jose's had a better year this year than previously, but San Jose is a team that struggled the last few years.
That's the team that comes to mind for me too.
Yeah, even Toronto up north has had a few struggles the last couple of years. I think if the teams had something more to fight for, it would make the league, from a news perspective, even a little more interesting and more eyes that way, because there's always next year. There's we may lose. Fear of loss is a big motivating factor for a lot of people, especially in sports. And I almost feel in this case here, and maybe you feel differently, and that's 1,000% fine, that it would add a level of intrigue, and it is something that the USL has been trying to basically implementing in this case. And I think in Ohio, you guys have like 6 different USL teams out there in some form or another. Sorry, Haley, man, I took over for you. That's just my take.
No, you're good. So 2 things I wanted to point out too that feel relative to this.
Okay.
Giannis Antetokounmpo was asked about being eliminated from the playoffs. I don't know, not too long ago, and he made an observation basically that losing is not a big deal. It's a part of sports, and we shouldn't place so much importance on it. It's just me paraphrasing what he said. And while that may be true, there also needs to be, I think, the accountability that being relegated offers
Mm-hmm.
teams,
Mm-hmm.
it makes them more accountable to putting out a good product. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? If San Jose, like we just mentioned, were threatened with being relegated out of the top flight that they've been a member of since God knows how long, if they were threatened with the prospect of being eliminated from that, then maybe they wouldn't have had the how many years streak of just middling performances or really pretty bad performances throughout in the league that they've had, right?
Mm-hmm.
It would stoke a little bit of a fire underneath owners to actually try and care and give a crap, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
You see even with Everton not too many years ago, they were about to be eliminated from the Prem, and I believe it was the first time in a very very long time that they were ever going to not that they were threatened with that they were ever going to not be in the top flight. And there's something about that atmosphere that everyone who was a fan showed up. The house was packed. They were
Mm.
cheering their team on. It was such a meaningful game. It felt like a championship, and it wasn't. It was just, hey, let's avoid this historic collapse,
Mm.
Gotcha.
you know? And it like Scott said, it makes those end of season games matter,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. I think there are a lot of different ways you can go on this. I understand that the postseason playoffs are an American thing,
Mhm.
and that it exists in all of the sports that we have. I think if Pro Rel was such a valuable tool, I think any one of the games that or sports that we have in America probably would have adopted it already. I'm not saying that Pro Rel doesn't have its finer points, especially coming off the weekend with the Leeds story and a couple of other teams that have either secured themselves in promotion or are not being relegated. I saw a lot of highlights of teams celebrating, and it got to a point where I wasn't sure if they were happy they weren't going down or if they were happy they were going up. But the point of the matter is that in the larger scheme of things, having been a part of Major League Soccer since 1998, um, uh, I can tell you that where I stand is I have a tremendous amount of respect for the men and women who have put money up to start this league and keep it going. I was with the league when we went through contraction, when we lost a couple of Florida teams,
Mhm.
when San Jose moved to Houston, and then San Jose popped back up again. I think your point, Harlan, about the San Jose Earthquakes not being successful over a long span of time is valid. I'm not so sure that the penalty of being relegated
Mm.
would have fixed that, because it could be that the ownership group would be completely happy sitting in the second tier. I think the financial, I've read a couple of books. Soccernomics is one of them. It helped me really understand what goes on in the Premiership and in leagues in general where you have relegation. And I'm not sure that what I would term to be somewhat socialist behavior in the economics of the Premier League would fit in a capitalist society,
Mm.
meaning everybody who owns a team in MLS right now would take some portion of their revenue and they would put it in a pot to help teams survive relegation or help teams get up to speed for promotion. Nobody wants to do that.
Mm.
It's every man for himself in America. That's the background, okay? That's the backbone. You may or may not agree with that, but the backbone is it's every man for himself because of the way we've set up this society. And so what you're asking, the Anschutz family, the Hunt family, and the Kraft family, as well as the Haslam's,
Mm.
Edwards, and Johnsons is, hey, we get that you're going to clear 20 million on your season this year, but remember you got that 3 million you have to put in the pot to help our teams get up to help Indy 11 to get up to speed next year when they get promoted. I don't know that Robert Kraft is going to be doing that because he owns the New England Patriots and he went on a run for 15 years with Tom Brady going to Super Bowls. He didn't have to share that with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a mentality thing among the ownership group that makes pro rel very difficult at the MLS level. And I can't say that from having spoken to any of them. I can only say that knowing how difficult it was for Phil Anschutz and Lamar Hunt to own nearly the entire league in the early days before they were able to sell all the individual properties off. And now Anschutz Entertainment owns one or two teams, and the Hunt Group, I think, owns one or two teams. But that's about it. So I think that's a real tough one. I would also go back to attendance. I think what Columbus has done, and a lot of teams are doing now, is they're building these 18 to 20,000 person stadiums, and they're making that ticket the hottest ticket in town. And that's their goal, is to make it the hottest ticket in town. In so doing, you create waiting lists for season tickets. That's exactly what Columbus has, and that's what other teams are dealing with as well. It's one of the reasons why, while I think it is an economic advantage for the Revolution to play at Gillette Stadium, it's also only a home field advantage because New England is so accustomed to that synthetic grass turf that they play on. Mm-hmm. They've identified land in, I don't know if it's Boston Harbor, but closer to Boston where they can actually build a stadium. New York City FC, a team close to you guys. New York State or Yankee Stadium is great for home field advantage. They know the sight lines. The disadvantage is for any team that comes in there. But they want their own place too. And to fill that place, but have it threatened in the last 7 games of the season to being either a high-profile stadium or a second-tier stadium for a year or more, I don't think is going to be acceptable to ownership. Now, I may have picked a bad example there because the NYC ownership group is based in Europe and they understand pro rel. So forgive me for that. Red Bulls are in the same boat, right? The Red Bulls are owned by a company over in Europe and they understand pro rel pretty easily. But the guarantee that you're always going to be in the spotlight in the top league, I think, is what makes it attractive to ownership groups in America. And so that's why I think that that's never going to happen in Major League Soccer. Now, I could eat my words, and I'd be happy to do that. I see that USL is going to experiment with that. I got to tell you, I think it's first of all, you have to educate the fan base. And I don't. I think the people who speak, and this is not a criticism, okay, because you spoke very eloquently, Harlan, about the value of pro rel. But I think the people who speak about pro rel are traditionally folks who have followed European soccer for a long time and understand it. Unfortunately, you guys represent just 2 tickets to that Indy 11 game on a Saturday night in Indianapolis. I've got suburban families from Carmel and Westfield and Southport who just want to take their kids to a game and see exciting soccer. If that Indy 11 ownership group doesn't have money when they get relegated to at least put a decent product on the field, that family is going to find something else to entertain themselves with on a Saturday night. Because they're not emotionally attached to that club the way Malta Amundsen was attached to his youth club in Denmark.
And unlike those European clubs, they also have so many other options of sports here to kind of attach themselves to. Yeah.
Yes, and Malta Amundsen's family would go to the Denmark club because he was wearing the club uniform in the youth game on Saturday morning. Then they would keep the uniform on and they'd all go to the game because that's what the town did. And that's true in all of Europe. When you're talking about a family from Carmel, Indiana, driving to downtown Indianapolis for an Indy 11 game, that's a 40-minute drive plus parking. Plus, it's another city. I have no attachment to Indianapolis other than I live north of there. My point is that the connection to that club is what I think has promoted pro-rel in a lot of European communities and helped it sustain itself as a format for teams surviving or not, because it's the only thing. But the alternatives for entertainment in America are vast, and I don't necessarily think that it's going to be a survivable component to a league's existence.
It's a really good point. Yeah,
Yeah, sorry to bring down the party.
No, 100%.
No, that's 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but in this case here, it does make a complete lot of sense because in Europe and, you know, a lot of other places around the world, there is much more of an emotional tie to your home turf.
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
anywhere you go, there's such an emotional connection to the city, to, you know, to wherever you have, that almost takes precedence over everything else. Here, sorry, like you said, the word vast, you know, not just in, you know, the sports aspect, but outside of that.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many options that people have available to them. You know, we come from the film industry, both of us. You know, that has completely died over the last couple of years because of the strikes that happened. Why?
Yeah.
Because people got interested in other things, TikTok, YouTube, and everything else that was out there, and they lost interest. You know, I think when you have, and I think honestly, your opinion really, really, really connected with me on this. I think that's the big difference between here and say Europe or Asia or Australia or anything like this, where the town and the location is more important than the person.
It is. You know, I'd be concerned about stadium location with ProRel, because stadium location in Europe, it's always been in the heart of the city. You don't buy a piece of farmland 20 miles out like they did in Frisco, Texas, and put up the FC Dallas Stadium. How can you convince Dallas Texans to support their Dallas team if the stadium is 25 miles away and there's no connection to public transportation? What do you mean I have to have a car? I mean, you know, if the three of us were living large in downtown New York City, we might have the finances to be able to afford that, to support our hometown team. But then you have to convince us that Frisco, Texas is our hometown team's location. That's a tough one.
Damn it, Chris, you're bursting my
No, that's
pro-roll
great.
bubble,
That's
man.
actually good. Like I said, I love
No.
the different vantage point. It's funny because actually I got the sense a little bit initially that you were going to go in this direction. That's why you asked us first to get our take before, you know, I like that. I actually really do like that. So
You guys are fun to talk to. I
I
appreciate
gotcha.
the opportunity to be able to do this. This is great.
Yeah, we'll let you go at this point. This went way longer than anticipated. I apologize for that.
Not at all. I enjoyed it.
But
I stick around if the company's good.
well, I'm honored by that. Thanks. So yeah, we'll let you go.
Thank you, man.
Chris, Mr. Duran, whatever you prefer in this case. I appreciate the time. Honestly,
Yeah, thank you, man.
Columbus
Thank you.
is a fun team to watch. It's been a fun team to watch. You mentioned Multi Amundsen. I've got a soft spot for Multi from his time with NYCFC.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that he got an MLS Cup a couple of years ago too. But you got a good squad there. You got a good group out there, and look forward to seeing what the team can do the rest of the season. So
Thanks, guys, very much. We appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. Thank you.
my privilege.
Thank you
Stay
for
well.
your time, man.
Bye.
Okay.